again, and welcome to another episode of Dynamically Speaking. We have joining us today Jackson Shaw, who is the Chief Strategy Officer for Clear Skye. Welcome, Jackson. Thank you for your time today.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm really excited and been looking forward to this conversation with you, Kelly, both professionally and as an old friend. So it's great to be here.
Indeed, myself as well. It's quite a treat. So what we're talking about today, as we start to come into the end of 2021 and look towards 2022, is what we think is going to lie ahead for the next year. And certainly when you talk about identity, even in the last couple of weeks, I know the industry certainly has been shifted quite a bit, and I wanted to throw to you to have the opportunity to speak to that a little bit before we begin.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. Oh boy, I'm already having a hard time talking. Sorry.
It's quite all right.
Yeah. Yeah, we lost a dear friend and a colleague who, in my opinion, really, in a lot of ways, was the founder of the identity market back in 95 and 96, Mr. Kim Cameron. Kim was, up until he retired, the chief architect for security and identity at Microsoft. And I had the pleasure of meeting Kim back in 1989 as a customer of Zoomit Corporation. And then eventually I went to work with Kim and Andy Ball and Barry McPeak, the partners, and the other folks at Zoomit back in 93 until we were acquired by Microsoft in 99. And I think Kim's influence has been, remarkable in the identity industry itself. And he just brought so much fun and pleasure and intelligence to identity. I mean, a guy like him who I saw speak with, hundreds and hundreds of people over time, both, when we were at Zoomit and at Microsoft, and, was a regular at business meetings with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer and other executives. Like I said, he made a huge difference in the industry and at Microsoft in particular. And many of us have mourned his passing, but at the same point in time, many of us also have amazing, remembrances of Kim and all of his speaking engagements, the conference he's been to. But sorry to see him, go, and my sympathies to his wife Adele and his children Max and Claire and their wider family. A big loss for the industry, but man, I don't think we'd be here if it wasn't for Kim and all of his work. So I appreciate the opportunity to say a few words about him because he was such an important person, and in many ways, as people have said, the father of identity.
Indeed, and very well said, Jackson.
Yeah.
So I think, when we think about, to your point, and as we were talking about Kim Cameron, the journey that identity has gone through in the last few years, we've seen various evolutions and iterations. And now one thing that we're seeing people talk about quite a bit is identity first security. So why don't we start by asking, at a high level, how would you describe identity first security, and why do you believe it's something enterprises should start paying attention to in 2022?
Right. I think that's a great question, and part of me wants to say, well, it's always been identity first security. Why now? And I mean, I also found it interesting that Gartner, sort of made their whole cool vendors for 2021 to be identity first vendors, which we were selected as one of them. So pretty happy about that. But to me, when I just think about the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years of cybersecurity and basically the threats from a lot of these bad actors, I think something like 80 to 85% of all cyber hacks have occurred because of a lack of security around identities. And in particular, I mean things like bad passwords or user IDs and passwords being able to be compromised because of either a bad piece of software inside of a company or through phishing campaigns or anything like that. So if you look at the fact that typically what happens is a hacker gets a user ID and password and then uses that user ID and password to access an enterprise system or any kind of a system, basically looking for a privileged account so that they can go further and potentially do more damage or get more information. It really is about identity. So part of me sees this as kind of tipping things on their head, where in the past we've been very focused on things like firewalls
Right.
and intrusion protection systems. And the fact of the matter is now, especially with COVID over the last 18, 24 months, we're so distributed, there really isn't a perimeter for the enterprise anymore. There is, I mean, there just isn't, right? Especially with again, since about 2010, with the rise of the SaaS platform, we have so many people using SaaS platforms, right? In the old days, people would say, well, gee, I've got 85 different products I have to use in my system, my on-prem products. Nowadays, it's like there's at least 85 different SaaS apps that most companies are using, in addition to everything they have on-prem. So the perimeter is gone, and you can't really just protect by a firewall anymore or intrusion protection systems. It really has to be at the identity level if you want to do protection. Again, if I kind of look at it another way around as a business person, maybe, is if 80 or 85% of all cyber hacks are caused by not having good control of identities, then you flip that around and you say, well, if I had good control of the identity system inside of an enterprise or in a commercial system, then you're basically saying I could prevent 80 to 85% of the cyber hacks that are occurring. So I think that's what we mean by identity security. It's always been there, but just because of the way, especially because of COVID, the way things have changed, remote workforce and all that stuff, it's really brought a rise to identity security.
That makes perfect sense, and is actually quite in line with my next question, which was really to say, IAM has been around for a while. It's not new, but now really does feel like its moment, the IAM moment, if you will.
Right.
So is there really a difference between looking at identity first security versus looking at traditional IAM security?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's another thing that's going on, and it's partially what's drawn me to working at Clear Skye, which is how digital transformation is happening at companies all around the world. It's huge. It's a strategy that's driving both money and efforts in companies to get closer to the consumer, get closer to their customer and their partners. It's all about trying to help drive top line revenue. And I think what I've seen is that identity has been this silo in the past. So we've got all these on-prem solutions, all these cloud solutions that are identity solutions, right? With very similar to some of the vendors that I've worked for in the past. And with the digital transformation, there are more and more companies that are starting to gravitate towards platforms, business platforms. And by business platforms, I actually don't mean something like Azure or Amazon, because those are really compute platforms. By business platforms, I mean platforms where there's a common data plane and a set of pluggable software modules that basically serve as a business platform for a digital transformation. ServiceNow being one of them, but there were others like Atlassian, Jira, and there are folks like Salesforce who are acting very much in the same way. So for me, I think one of the other key things that the customers are starting to see and the market is starting to see is how important identity is to that business platform, and how identity needs to, I think, move away from being a solution that stands outside of the business but is brought into the business in the platform. So I think that's another big thing that we'll see, over the next decade.
Excellent. Okay, and that's an excellent and interesting distinction between the two types of platforms.
Right.
So thank you for that. I think that's a clear way to kind of delineate between the two issues. So thinking ahead then to 2022, and we've talked about the difference between identity first security and traditional IAM. We're also seeing other kind of frameworks or methodologies, I guess you could say, that have come to the fore and people are being encouraged to look at,
Mhm.
such as zero trust.
Right.
So Jackson, in your experience and in the work you're doing now with Clear Skye, how do you believe an identity first security approach fits in then if an enterprise is trying to implement something like zero trust?
Right, right. Well, I mean, look, that's a great question, and it's really interesting when you think again of what zero trust is kind of about. I mean, it's the evolution of where we were on VPNs in the past, and VPN was quite simply, user ID, password, and perhaps multi-factor authentication, allowing you on the highway into your company, right? And it was a one and done kind of thing. You would get on the VPN, you'd authenticate, and once you were inside everywhere. You could basically
Right.
get to anything you had, the ability to. But at the same time, if a cyber hacker got in, then one of the problems was they also had access to everything inside the company. So zero trust is all about sort of breaking that apart and giving you, for the lack of a better term, let me call it VPN access to a particular application or a particular thing that you need to do at that particular point in time. Now, when you think of that, I mean, it's obviously there's great benefits to that. If all I need inside is access to the SAP system, for example, that's all I get. I don't have access to other things. And that all starts with identity, of course. And it also starts with governance in the sense of, should Jackson have access to these things or not, right? And I think zero trust is the sort of mechanism for enabling that. So in a lot of ways, I just see zero trust as the evolution of the VPN, and I also see both identity and zero trust working together, because if you think of where we are with modern identity management and identity governance, it's all about making sure Kelly has access to the right capabilities and tools and resources, or Jackson has access to his capabilities, resources, or tools internally, and they may be different than you. So rather than giving both of us full access, give each of us what we need. And if you kind of bubble it up, it's really clear that starts with identity, right? You getting the things that you need as you move from one role to another, things being added, things being deleted. When you leave the company, you lose that access. So I see these two things, both zero trust and identity security, identity first security, as being extremely complementary. And in some ways, I would say if you don't have a good identity management system, you're probably going to have some hard time, getting zero trust, to be fully realized within a company.
Fair enough, and that's certainly something we're hearing from enterprise customers as
Sure.
well. Is
I
that
can believe it.
that's a key component. So we've talked about that as a potential challenge in 2022.
Mhm.
Is there anything else are there anything else, other things that you think that enterprises will be challenged with as we head into the next year?
Sure. I mean, I do think, I do think that if you go back in time and you think a little bit about where identity was, let's say 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of, we started off with a solution like, my original solution, which was Zoom and Via, that Kim and I and others worked on, a standalone on-premise solution that a few years into 2000, we started to see what folks would call suite solutions, where you didn't just have provisioning, but you also had web access, and you had, ultimately federation, or these things all being able to be purchased and hopefully looking integrated from a particular vendor. So you'd get this on-prem solution, whether it was from Oracle or IBM or somebody else, that was, a best of suite. And we would hear customers say, oh, I don't want a best of breed, I want a best of suite. Or we'd hear customers purchasing best of breed instead of best of suite for various different reasons. I think what we've seen now in the marketplace is a lot of these standalone solutions, similar to what we had in the old days, but now they're SaaS based. And they probably have their close brothers or sisters who are also on-prem based. I mean, it's pretty common to see an identity vendor that has an on-prem version of their software and a cloud-based version of their software. I think what we're going to see is these products merge more towards best of suite in the cloud, but on business platforms like what I talked about earlier.
Right.
So I think that'll be one of the things that will, I certainly hope, help change the identity industry and help with security. I don't see a big change happening around cybersecurity, for example, or hacking in general. It's going to continue to happen. There have been some great products and capabilities that have come out that I hope we see more of. Like, for example, I'll give you one: remote browser isolation, where when something questionable comes into the company and someone clicks on a link, instead of the browser executing in your desktop, it executes somewhere in the cloud in a different, like, not on your premises. And the great thing about that is if a bad payload comes in or something bad happens, it's not happening in your system, right? So I think once we see more tools like that, more capabilities like that expand out to companies, I'm hoping that we'll see less and less, cyber hacking, but it's not going away. And I do believe that the more vendors like us or vendors that have a SaaS approach can improve security and get releases out faster, the better it will be for customers. So, to answer your question more directly, I don't think cyber hacking is going away. It's going to increase. How we contain and monitor it and manage it is going to be very important for identity management companies just generally. And, to the point of this whole conversation, identity first security and how it's going to play to help that. And I think by having a business platform where you can have a common data plane where signals can cross over multiple products, very easily, will be quite helpful to that. So we'll see how that changes things in the next few years.
Perfect. And actually, speaking of the next few years, I'm going to ask you to dust off your
Sure.
crystal ball here. And when you think about identity first, and you've spoken to this a little bit
Right.
as we've had this discussion, but how do you see this market evolving in, say, the next 5-10 years? If you had that crystal ball vision, what would that look like?
Right. Well, I'm obviously very enthralled with, platform-based identity. And when I said earlier how I don't necessarily think that's Microsoft or Amazon, because these guys have grown up as purveyors of, compute cycles, right?
Right.
And there are vendors that are out there and available today and are growing up today that are basically business platforms that you can base your business on, right? It's almost like, the way I really look at it is almost like something like the Office 365 suite. In theory, if all you had to do was Excel and Word and Mail, you could be in the Office 365 suite all day long. And we all know what that benefit is, or even if it's the Google suite, we understand the benefit of being in that suite all day long. I just think we're going to see more over the next 3, 4, 5 years of a gravitation toward these business platforms being that new suite where you've got workflow built in, you've got all the tools built in, you've got the web services built in, the real easy way to integrate all of these things together. And back to sort of my original point, where identity can be part of that instead of apart from it, the way it is today.
Excellent. Okay. Is there anything else you think folks should know who are watching right now? Anything that we might have missed?
Right. Well, I think there's some really incredible stuff going on across the industry. Whether it's things like remote browser isolation, or some of the efforts that are underway, still, right, to eliminate the password. I think there's a lot of great stuff that's happening in the identity industry, and folks like Gartner and 451 Research and Forrester have been doing a pretty good job in trying to light the way. Also, the Identity Professionals Organization, trying to do the same thing. So my general recommendation to anybody in the business would be is get involved in something like the Identity Pros, or make sure you're following some of the research and find out who are some of the strategic thinkers in the business, because there are a lot of great people out there that are talking about identity and are talking about it in a way, just as Kim did, about trying to make a better future for all of us, basically through using identity. So I'd highly recommend, getting to Gartner conferences, getting to the European Identity Conference in Berlin in April, in May, that Kubinger Cole puts on, just to see some of these future-looking things.
Excellent, excellent. And finally, Jackson, if folks wanted to learn a little bit more about the exciting things that you guys are doing at Clear Skye,
Yeah.
where should they go?
Clearskye.com, and that Skye is with an E. So you just pop over there and you can learn all you want. Or if anyone feels like dropping me an email, I'm Jackson@clearskye.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn. I love, I get on LinkedIn fairly frequently, so I love seeing all the posts there.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much again for your
You're
time
welcome.
today. It's always an insightful conversation whenever we get to chat, so deeply
You're welcome.
appreciated. And again, thank you for the very kind words about Kim Cameron.
Oh, you're welcome. Happy holidays to everybody, and to you and the whole team at Axiomatics.
Great. Thank you again. That's all the time we have for today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. And as Jackson said, happy holidays to everyone.
Yeah. Cheers, everybody.